There are parts of the city that don't appear on maps. Not because they were erased, but because remembering them became dangerous. Sector 4 is one of those places. It exists between routes, behind locked gates, and in the gaps where systems hesitate. No one works there. No one lives there. And no one is supposed to ask why it still needs maintenance. But every city has its failures. Every system leaves something behind. Someone has to keep it contained. Someone has to walk the streets that shouldn't exist. Someone has to remember what the city chose to forget. They call him the Custodian of Sector 4, and tonight, something is out of place. Episode 1, The Night Shift Protocols. The Craigslist listing had appeared at 3 a.m., glowing on Elias's cracked laptop screen like a digital beacon. Legitimate government contractors didn't usually hire security personnel on forums reserved for used futons and questionable concert tickets, but the pay was bolded and underlined, $45 an hour. Elias was 23, drowning in student loans, and plagued by chronic insomnia. It felt like destiny. But now, sitting in the flickering fluorescent light of the security booth, Elias realized it wasn't destiny. It was a trap. The interview had been brief. Mr. Greaves, a pale man who smelled of formaldehyde and old parchment, hadn't asked for a resume. He'd simply checked Elias's pulse, inspected his teeth, and asked if he was prone to hallucinations. When Elias said no, Greaves handed him a heavy iron keyring, a flashlight, and a laminated sheet of paper. "Welcome to the Sector for Data Archive," Greaves had said, his voice flat. "Do not leave the booth until 6 a.m. Do not let them inside." Before Elias could ask who they were, the heavy steel door clicked shut, locking him in. Elias looked down at the laminated paper on the desk. It wasn't a contact list. It was a set of instructions. The Night Shift Protocols 1. The monitor check. You have 6 monitors. Monitor 4 is broken and displays only static. If Monitor 4 suddenly shows a clear image of a hallway, cover the screen immediately with the provided black cloth. Do not look at the face in the camera. 2. The oxygen system. At 1:15 a.m., the ventilation system will hiss. If the hissing stops and you hear a rhythmic thumping inside the vents, hold your breath for 10 seconds. They track by sound, but they hunt by the sound of respiration. 3. The intercom. There is no intercom. If the phone rings, answer it. If a voice asks for the archivist, say, "He has gone to the basement," and hang up. If the voice sounds like your mother, do not answer. For the walk, you must do 1 round of the hallway at 3 a.m. If you see a tall figure in a yellow raincoat, simply turn around and walk back. Walk, do not run. He enjoys the chase. 5. The door. Do not open the booth door between 3:33 a.m. and 3:34 a.m. No matter how much they scream. It is not human. Elias laughed nervously, crumpling the paper and tossing it onto the desk. He assumed the temp agency was hazing the new guy. He spun the chair around to check the monitors. 5 showed grainy corridors. Monitor 4 was static. "Spooky," he muttered. He checked the clock. 1:14 a.m. 60 seconds later, the vents overhead kicked on with a loud, industrial hiss. Elias smirked, leaning back to close his eyes. Then the hissing stopped. Total silence flooded the booth. The air grew instantly heavy and stale. Elias opened his eyes, staring up at the rusted grate directly above his head. Thump. It was a wet, heavy sound, like a slab of raw meat dropped onto sheet metal. Thump. It was moving, crawling. Thump. It was directly above him. Elias froze. He remembered the paper. They hunt by the sound of respiration. He slapped a hand over his mouth and pinched his nose shut, squeezing his eyes tight. His lungs burned immediately. The sound in the vent paused. The vibration of something shifting its weight rattled the grate. It was pressing its face against the metal, listening. A single drop of thick, black liquid fell from the vent, splattering onto the desk inches from Elias's free hand. It smelled of copper and spoiled milk. Elias didn't breathe. He held his breath until black spots danced in his vision. Finally, after what felt like an hour, the rhythmic thumping receded down the ventilation shaft. The air conditioner hissed back to life. Elias gasped, sucking in air so desperately he nearly choked. He stared at the rule sheet, his hands trembling violently. Kay, he whispered to the empty room. Shh, Kay, it's real. Elias had spent 30 minutes scrubbing the black goo off the desk when the phone rang. It wasn't a digital trill. It was a harsh mechanical burring from the red rotary phone on the wall. Elias jumped, his knee knocking hard against the desk. Rule 3. If the voice sounds like your mother, do not answer. Bring. He picked up the receiver slowly, pressing it to his ear. He said nothing. Elias. His blood ran cold. It was her. It was his mother. She had been dead for 3 years, but the cadence, the warmth, the pitch was perfect. Elias, honey, are you there? The voice asked. It's so cold. Please, I need you to come pick me up. I'm just outside the heavy door. Please, Elias. Elias gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. Tears stung his eyes. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run to the door. Don't answer. Don't answer. Why aren't you talking to me, baby? The voice shifted. It dropped an octave, sounding suddenly wet and gargled. Open the door, Elias. Open the door. Elias slammed the receiver back onto the cradle and backed away until he hit the wall of monitors. The phone did not ring again. He was trying to calm his racing heart when the light in the booth changed. The room was usually bathed in blue, but suddenly the quality of light shifted to a stark white. Elias looked up, monitor 4. The static was gone. In its place was a crystal-clear, high-definition feed of the hallway directly outside the booth door. But the angle was wrong. The camera wasn't mounted on the wall. Someone was holding it. The image shook slightly as the cameraman moved closer to the glass. On the screen, Elias could see the back of his own head through the booth window. He was watching himself being watched. Elias scrambled for the black cloth Greaves had left, threw it over the monitor, but not before the camera on the screen panned up. He covered it just as a pair of eyes too wide, devoid of eyelids, peered in the bottom corner of the display. He taped the cloth down and didn't look back. The alarm on his watch beeped. The walk. Elias didn't want to go out there, but the rules had saved him twice. If he broke them, the consequences would surely be worse than the fear. He took the flashlight and unlocked the booth door. The hallway air was freezing and smelled of ozone. He shone the beam down the long concrete corridor, nothing but pipes and shadows, started walking. He reached the halfway point. The far wall was visible, empty. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding and turned to head back. That's when he saw him. Standing at the very end of the hall, blocking the path back to safety, was a figure. He was impossibly tall, his head brushing the ceiling pipes. He wore a bright, slick yellow raincoat. The hood was up, casting his face in shadow, but a grin with too many teeth caught the light. The figure took a disjointed step forward. Walk, do not run. Elias's muscles coiled, screaming at him to sprint. No, he whispered. He forced his left foot forward, then his right. He walked at a casual pace toward the booth, toward the figure. As Elias got closer, the entity stepped to the side, pressing himself against the wall to let him pass. Elias could smell him rainwater and rotting fish. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the face in the hood. As he passed, a low, guttural giggle sounded right next to his ear. You're a good boy, Elias. Elias kept walking. He stepped inside the booth, locked the door, and slid to the floor, his legs finally giving out. Elias watched the clock. 3:32 a.m. Rule 5. Under no circumstances are you to open the booth door between at 3:33 a.m. and 3:34 a.m. The clock clicked over. 3:33 a.m. Something slammed against the booth door with the force of a battering ram. The reinforced glass rattled in its frame. Help me? It was a man's voice, screaming, raw, throat-shredding shrieks of agony. Please, Jyoti, let me in. It's eating my legs. Oh God, help me. Fingernails clawed frantically against the glass. Elias could hear the wet tearing of fabric and flesh. Open the door? You have to open the door. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, hands clamped over his ears, curling into a ball under the desk. Elias, I know you're in there. Open IT, open IT, open IT. The voice changed. It wasn't a man anymore. It was a cacophony of child crying, a woman shrieking. A dog barking all layered over one another in a wall of noise. Elias watched the second hand on the wall clock through his fingers. 3 hours, 33 minutes, and 50 seconds. The pounding stopped. The screaming cut out instantly, as if a radio had been unplugged. The silence that followed was louder than the noise. Elias looked at the clock. 3 hours, 34 minutes, and 1 second. He stood up on shaking legs and looked out the glass. The hallway was empty. There were no scratch marks on the door. No blood. Nothing. The heavy steel door at the entrance clanked open. Sunlight spilled into the hallway. Mr. Greaves walked in, looking exactly as he had the night before. He walked to the booth, unlocked it with his master key, and opened the door. He looked at the black cloth taped over monitor 4. He looked at the stain on the desk. He looked at Elias, shivering in the corner. For the first time, Greaves smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent work, Elias," he said. He handed Elias a check. "See you tonight?" Elias looked at the check. $600. He looked at the dark hallway behind Greaves. He thought about the debts, thought about the voice on the phone. "Yeah," Elias said, his voice hollow. "See you tonight." Greaves nodded and left. As Elias walked to his car, squinting in the morning sun, he knew he was going back. He had to know what was on monitor 4, and he had a sinking feeling that the rules were going to change. If you heard something breathing behind you while this played, don't worry, that means it's still contained. For now, if you want access to the next shift, if you want to see what's really on monitor 4, subscribe and keep the notifications on, because the rules change after episode 1. And next time.